In this session, our focus will be on diversity management. We will discuss issues of equality, diversity, and inclusion, not only in the context of Pakistan, but also in a global context. This is based on, this lecture primarily is based on Chapter 4 from the textbook Human Resource Management, a Global and Critical Perspective. So in terms of the topics which I hope that we will cover in this session, there are a couple of case studies, including a case study on Oscars. There would be some theoretical discussion of diversity management, the discourse of diversity management, various approaches to diversity, their pros and cons. I would also very briefly discuss the approach which I have taken along with my colleagues, for example, Mustafa Belgin, Edwina Pio, and other colleagues, which proposes and argues for a more holistic, multi-level relational approach to diversity. We would also discuss issues of business and social case of diversity, and also the legal limitations. So, for example, the need to move from positive discrimination to positive action. We will also very briefly discuss approaches to action plan and strategies of diversity management. Towards the end of the chapter, there is also a case study which illustrates a female employee's career experiences in the UK and the Middle East. So let's start with the mini case study, the opening case study. The case study is based on my own article, which was written in 2016, and basically talks about the Academy Awards, the Oscars. And in 2016, it was the second year in a row that all the 20 acting nominations, they went to white actors. So this racial anomaly resulted in a heated debate about ethnic or racial bias in the Oscars. And there were many different opinions of film artists and activists. So some of them denied that there is any racial bias in the Academy Awards, whereas some others, they alleged that there was an outright racism in the way such nominations took place. I discuss in this article that there is some reason that when we look at the very construction of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science, the organization which is responsible for the Oscars, its membership is limited to mostly white actors, white writers, directors, and other professionals. And there is an institutional bias because new members, they have to be sponsored by two current members within their own field. So according to a 2012 study with more than 6,000 voting members, the Academy is predominantly white. 94% of its members are white and predominantly male. 77% of its members happen to be male. So apparently it is almost an all-white club, and it's predominantly a white male club. So surely people who come from non-white backgrounds and who are females, actors, professionals, writers, directors, they seem to be disadvantaged in the construction of the academy, which then is also reflected, unfortunately, in the underrepresentation of racial minorities and women in these nominations and awards. So the questions, there are two questions which I identify in the book. So for example, the first is that the assumption is that you have read not only the extract which is given in this book chapter, but also read the entire article, the references given in citations. Uh, so you have to offer your reflections on the extent to which institutional racism may be a factor in the nomination and award of the Oscars. So that is something which you may wish to think about. And the second question that I would like you to think about is critically discuss this statement. The dominance and perpetuation of whiteness in the Academy Awards or in the Academy itself is hard to ignore. You may also add further nuance to this question. The dominance and perpetuation of, for example, men in the academy is hard to ignore, for example. Or we may also like to contextualize it in any country's context. So, for example, in Pakistan, to what extent are certain ethnic minorities, religious minorities, women, people, those people who have disability, they remain underrepresented and ignored. For example, in positions and structures of power and in terms of actual outcomes, actual educational, employment, and political outcomes in organizations. So with this, with this very brief case study, which has actually provided you with a context, with a background context, in terms of why issues of equality and diversity are relevant to societies and organizations, we can now progress to the, the main notions, the main theoretical discussion. Indeed, there are issues. Indeed, there is workforce diversity, and there is diversity in societies. We may, or some of us may, wish to ignore the fact that although all of us belong to, for example, one specific nation or one specific country, we also have our own heterogeneities. We have different languages, we have different genders, we have different religious affiliations, we have different religious practices, and we have different family circumstances, we have different issues of ability and disability. And that does not make any one of us better or superior than the other. All of us should be equally valued, and we should have equal access and equal opportunities when it comes to, for example, education, employment, political participation, decision making, and so on and so forth. So then why exactly is this that we see that there are stereotypes in the wider society? We think that by virtue of our ethnicity, or by virtue of our religion, or by virtue of our physical ability, somehow we are better than the other person or than the other group. Surely there are biases at play, and sometimes the biases are blatant or explicit, but on many occasions these biases are unconscious and hidden. Now, previous research has demonstrated that biases they remain irrespective of our education and irrespective of our attention to these facts, and irrespective of, for example, legislative mechanisms for equality. Such biases remain as a mental residue in most of us. So this also suggests that although on the surface and maybe at the conscious level, we may remain committed to equality. However, we continue to possess hidden or implicit negative biases or stereotypes against people on the basis of whatever background, on the basis of gender, family status, social class status, religion, sect, or ethnicity. You name it. So, unconscious bias refers to a bias that we are not really aware of and which happens outside of our control. It's a bias that happens automatically and is triggered by our brain making judgments and assumptions of people and situations that is influenced by our social conditioning, our own background, our own cultural environment, our judgments, our past experiences. This then has an impact on the way we make decisions or we design our recruitment programs, we design our job specifications, for example, we conduct interviews, we make decisions in hiring, the way we mentor people, the way we review people's performance, the way we speak to people, the way we use our discretion in favor of certain people or against certain people. So unconscious bias that remains to be, or that seems to be at play in many of these decisions within and outside organizations. So, what exactly can be done in order to address this unconscious bias? Organizations and consultants, they have identified uh, a few ways through which at least we can make an attempt in order to make the unconscious bias more explicit and perhaps in order to address the unconscious bias. One of such models is the space 2 model, and in the space 2 model, as you can see that there is S, P, A, C, and then there are two E's. So the first alphabet is S. S refers to slowing down. So this means that we need to slow down and we need to be mindful and considerate in our response to others. So instead of a knee-jerk reaction or a preset approach to dealing with others, we have to be more mindful and we have to be more slow in our approach to them or in our approach to certain situations. So slowing down is the first thing. And the second thing is, in terms of P, that we have to take the perspective. We have to actively imagine the other person's thoughts and feelings. So we have to develop empathy. The third is that we have to ask ourselves, we have to actively ask ourselves that what exactly is our own assumption based on? And is this assumption based on certain stereotypes and certain judgments and certain form of social conditioning or our own past experiences or past learnings? So we have to ask ourselves about our own assumptions. We have to critique our own selves. Then we also have to think about cultural intelligence that, for example, how a person is behaving in a specific manner. So instead of judging them using our own cultural lens, we should try to use their cultural lens. So once again, it's a form of empathy. Another very useful way is that whenever we are thinking negatively or adversely about a specific person or community in terms of their limitations, then perhaps we should also think about some counter stereotypical individuals in that specific community. For example, if there is an adverse stereotype that women cannot be good drivers, then maybe think about those women who are excellent drivers. Or think about those members of the ethnic or religious community who are, for example, a deviation from the stereotype which we have in our own mind. So exemplars, counter stereotypical examples would be useful. And then we also have to expand our own network instead of remaining confining to, for example, our own social class, our own gender, or our own racial, religious, ethnic background. We have to try to diversify our own network of friendships and our own network of acquaintances. That would also give us more diverse intelligence and more diverse understanding of people. So that is so this phase two model can be used in order to understand and address issues of unconscious bias. Now, coming back to the main topic, the topic of diversity management, we have to understand that there are two main approaches to diversity management, which is the social case and the other is the business case. The business case says that look, if we are paying attention to have more women and more ethnic minorities and more religious minorities and more people from other diverse backgrounds in terms of social class, in terms of disability, and so on and so forth. In terms of gender identity, for example, then we also have to think about the fact that the more diverse this organization is, the more diverse its leadership team is, the more it would be productive for the organization. So there is a business case for the organization in terms of the benefits which could be reaped because of diversity. For example, we will have more creativity. Groupthink does not lead to creativity. More diverse people means more diverse ideas and more diverse opinions and more diverse ways of approaching problems. Uh, Diversity means that we will have the approach to and we will have access to more diverse markets. We will have maybe more ways of looking at things. So there is surely a business case for diversity. But there is also a social case, and the social case means that look, it is an ethical thing to do. Discrimination is an unethical thing, and equality of opportunity is an ethical thing. It's a socially correct thing to do in order to give, for example, a representation to people the way they are represented in our population. And of course, we have to be legally compliant. Legally compliant does not only have social value, it also has a legal value, because if we are not legally compliant in terms of non-discrimination, then surely people can take us to a court of law, and the organizations may be penalized in terms of heavy fines because of legal violation. However, despite the social and the business benefits of diversity, the issues of diversity and equality in relative terms, when we compare it to other mainstream topics and disciplines of management and business, the topic of diversity management, it remains relatively ignored in academic scholarship and also in academic teaching. So the discourse, if we go to the discourse of diversity management, we can see that there are three key approaches which are illustrated in figure 4.1 in the book itself. So let's take a look at this specific figure. Management. So traditional approaches to diversity management, they have focused on how diversity is to be understood and managed within the context of organizations. So back in 2009, with one of my colleagues, Professor Mustafa Azbelgan, who is currently a full professor at Brunel University, London, we worked on a project which was then published as a research paper in the International Journal of Human Resource Management. And here we propose that instead of confining and approaching diversity within the domain of an organization, it has to be understood at multiple levels, and those multiple levels are interconnected and they are also related to each other, overlapping. So we propose that we have to understand diversity at the macro-national level. For example, the legal environment in terms of equal opportunity or diversity in a country, the social stereotypes, the culture, to what extent the culture is, for example, embracing of diversity, and to what extent, for example, women or ethnic minorities, they face adverse stereotypes. So these are a few variables which can be discussed at the, or which can be understood and taken into account at the macro national level. At the organizational level or the meso-organizational level, we may think about, for example, we can conduct the current audit of the organization in terms of uh, the percentage of women as a part of the workforce, and the percentage of women or ethnic minorities, for example, as a part of the leadership and the managerial team. And similarly, we can look at the resources which the organization has made available to promote diversity. Does the organization have a diversity policy? Does the organization have specific targets in terms of diversity management for the next 1 to 3 years? Does the organization have dedicated some resources? Does it provide training for sensitization, awareness, and promotion of diversity, and so on and so forth? And then at the micro individual level, we have to look at the individual identity and the individual circumstances of people. So, for example, women and men's circumstances may vary, not only on the basis of their gender identity, but also on the basis of their family identity. For example, women are more likely than men to have caring and caring responsibilities for their children or for their dependents. So then, which makes then their circumstances more demanding when compared with men. Similarly, the way individuals exercise their own agency, the way they exercise their own resilience in terms of, or despite the constraints which they face at the organizational or at the national level. So these are some of the issues which may be considered at the micro individual level. And then surely there are issues of intersectionality. So, for example, all women would not face similar issues. So, women from, for example, social underclass, their issues would be much more compound, or much would be much more complex in terms of access to education and employment. So this is where we propose that a holistic, multi-level understanding of diversity is important in order to develop an ability to manage diversity. Surely there are many benefits of diversity and inclusion. I have highlighted a few of those already, but very quickly I can identify two or three again, that to develop an improved understanding of those we work for, with, and around, we would like to develop an understanding of who are the people around us. So instead of having adverse stereotypes or negative assumptions about them, we would like to develop a holistic and empathetic understanding of them. And surely we as managers, employees, and organizational leaders, we are interested in creating a work environment where everybody has the equal opportunity to reach their full potential, so that they could also not only help themselves in their own individual career, but they are also productive for their colleagues, teams, and the overall organization or the wider society. So these are some of the benefits of having workforce diversity and inclusion. We have already discussed the issues of positive discrimination and positive action, but let me, positive discrimination, affirmative action, as I said, it's not legal in some countries because apparently, from at least one specific perspective, it may be seen as violating issues of merit and equality. Although this is a point of discussion that uh, positive action itself uh, may be seen as a step towards merit. So, what exactly is positive action? Non-discriminatory selection procedures and selection and training programs. Uh, for example, policies which discourage bullying and harassment at the workplace, policies which actively encourage dignity at work, which promote the creation of safe work environment for everyone, irrespective of their gender, ethnicity, or physical ability or disability. Related to this are the issues of sexual harassment and bullying. Harassment is could be physical or it could be psychological. And this takes place usually when people take advantage of their positions of power, and they try to cause discomfort to another person, not necessarily through their physical gestures, but it may also be verbal, or it may be implicit. In any way, a continuous causation of discomfort to the other person or community, surely that may be taken and that may be seen as a case of harassment or bullying. Bullying is usually not specifically targeted against one specific community or one specific gender. It may be seen as an equal opportunity harassment and is equally to be discouraged at the workplace. So while we have discussed issues of diversity and equality and inclusion and the adverse side of diversity, in terms of not adverse side, but in terms of the way sometimes people mistreat diversity through harassment and bullying, we also have to think about strategies, that what exactly can be done by organizations in order to manage diversity. So surely the first thing is that organizational leaders, they have to be committed to diversity. In order for them to be committed to diversity, they have to be convinced of the business benefits. So the productive benefits of diversity, or the cost of not having diversity in the organization, or the cost of not, for example, conforming to the legal requirements. They have to understand. But also they have to understand the social and ethical side of diversity, that why it is important to have non-discrimination in the workplace, okay? So diversity should then become a part of an organization's strategic plan. So there should also be a strategic consideration and targets of diversity, and diversity may also be more explicitly linked to performance, and there also has to be some consideration of diversity in recruitment, succession planning, employee engagement, and so on and so forth. One possible step which may be considered for diversity management or diversity promotion in an organization is diversity audit. So here you can think about the scope of the audit plan and what exactly would be covered in the audit plan. So for example, in this slide, I mentioned that the audit may focus on, for example, compliance with government regulations. That look, we would like to see that whether in our human resource management processes and procedures and other management processes and procedures in this organization, are we conforming to our legal and constitutional requirements in terms of, for example, the non-discrimination on the basis of gender or religion or disability, or gender identity, for example. So here we can conduct audit of the past 3 or 5 years of our processes and our SOPs and procedures. We can dedicate certain team members, for example, somebody who is director or senior manager in HR, or somebody who is a diversity specialist. They may be assigned with the responsibility to conduct this audit. The time frame could be it could be 1 month, it could be 2 months or 3 months, depending on the size of the organization and the scope of the study which has to be conducted. And the resources which might be needed in order to conduct this kind of audit could be, for example, access to personnel files, and such access can be limited to only 1, 2, or 3 persons who are involved in this audit. Maybe if a survey has to be conducted, then maybe uh, a free or a subscribed account on SurveyMonkey or any other similar website or portal could be purchased or could be created. Industry salary reports could be created in order to see what exactly is happening in the industry vis-a-vis the data and the trends within this organization. And surely leadership support would be needed in order to dedicate time and resources for this specific audit. In the next slide, we also look at the actual specimen of diversity audit plan. Here we have focused on only 4 dimensions, which is recruitment, hiring, turnover, and grievances. But surely other dimensions can also be included in a diversity audit. So very quickly, let me take a look at the recruitment checklist. So what's the ratio of gender at all organizational levels? So what's the makeup? What's their makeup in terms of not only a percentage of employment, but also percentage of managerial position. So, but surely if we are looking at the recruitment, so recruitment pool, we have to look at the ratio of gender and the ratio of race and ethnicities. And then we have to think about this thing, that is our workforce representative of our community? So theoretically speaking, for example, if 5% of people in Lahore, they are from non-Muslim backgrounds, then do our recruits, they also 5% of them, do they also come from non-Muslim backgrounds? Thinking out loud. So similarly, if 49% or 50% of our population in this specific city or country, they happen to be women, are women also to a similar extent or percentage represented within the recruitment pool for this specific job or for this specific department? So there may surely be exceptions, but then we also have to look at the reasons for those exceptions or those deviations, and we may think about some interventions which might be considered in order to, for example, to make this representation more balanced. Okay, after the audit plan, we may also think about strategic plan or diversity strategic plan in organizations. So once again, we will start with the scope. So provide a sentence or two that describes that the scope of diversity strategic plan for this specific organization. So one example could be that this diversity strategic plan provides a methodical approach to increasing diversity within our workforce or within our organizational culture. So here we are using a methodical approach to understand where we are and what exactly is our baseline and how could this be improved. So then we have to link this scope with the vision and mission of our own organization. So surely we would be referring to mission and vision statements of the organization. And then we would also like to, or we should also provide a linkage statement to link the scope of our diversity strategic plan with the overall mission and vision of the organization. And similar exercise could be done with the organizational values. Then we have to think about key strategies and goals. So in the next slide, we specify the time frame and the resources which might be needed and the responsibilities. So let's take a look at the strategic plan, specimen strategic plan. Time frame, for example, in this specific instance could be anything from 3 to 6 months. So if we look at goal number 1, that is to intensify recruitment efforts in new segments. So the one objective could be to add women to the candidate pool during periods of recruitment. So activities could be that research and determine who to partner with to gain more info about hiring females. If in this specific department there is a shortage of women, then maybe we may think about partnering with local community, local universities, local female networks in order to provide access to and maybe initial training to women in order to be able to apply to and qualify for these jobs. Certain timelines can be specified, certain lead persons can be made responsible for this specific objective, And we can see that what kind of resources could be needed. Do we need, for example, additional transport or additional, for example, refreshment in order to have networking events with women networks, or organize specific showcase events at local universities. Okay, let's go to the critical thinking slide. Here, I would like you to spend time, your own time, to have more critical reflection on 4.2 questions we can very quickly read. If the majority group remains resentful towards disadvantaged employees, is it at all useful to implement diversity management in the workplace? So, on many occasions, I have seen that organizational managers, top managers, and senior leaders, they claim that, look, we are sympathetic to have more women, particularly in leadership positions, but then they are not there. Something, apparently they are not able to explain it fully. But if I have to listen to them, they are trying to explain to me, and perhaps to all of us, that perhaps there are not enough qualified women for leadership positions or managerial positions in organizations, or perhaps because of their own unique circumstances, women are not available full time for these roles. Uh, so, whatever it is it due to backlash? Is it due to lack of understanding? Is it due to resentment? Whatever the reason is, we have to understand that if there is a backlash, or if there is a resentment, then then at all should we think about, or we should think about diversity management strategic plan? Would it be useful at all, or we are simply wasting our and their time? So these and other critical questions you may think about, and you may think about finding answers to those questions in your own time. So to conclude this session, surely there is an ongoing demographic transformation. There are more and more women in the workplace. More and more women are having access to education. In fact, their educational grades and outcomes in many universities and colleges are even better than academic outcomes of boys, or male students. Similarly, there is an increasing number of migrants in the workplace. There is an increasing number and percentage of those who are migrating from rural to urban backgrounds, or from developing to developed countries. So then surely it has immense implication for the future of HRM and the way we are approaching and managing diversity in organizations. At the same time, organizations have to be cognizant of social and business cases of diversity management, and whereas the organizations have to remain at the right side of the law in terms of legal compliance, it is important that they remain proactive in order to reap full benefits of diversity management, not only for in the interest of the individuals and the communities, but also for the interest of the organization and the wider society. And finally, instead of the usual organizational focused approaches to diversity and equality, there is a need to develop more holistic, multi-level perspectives um, on diversity, so that diversity could be understood and managed um, in a more meaningful manner, instead of a cosmetic and perhaps less effectual understanding of diversity within the domain of a single organization. I hope that this session on diversity was useful to you in order to develop um, a more nuanced understanding of this concept. I thank you for your patient listening to this specific presentation.